The Love, Life, and Lose Weight podcast will teach you the art and science of changing your habits around food. If you know what to do, but can't figure out why you're just not doing it, this is the right podcast for you. I'm your host, Advanced Certified Weight and Life Coach, Heather Beardsley. I've helped hundreds of women just like you figure out how to think and eat like a normal eater, lose weight, and love life on the journey to goal weight and beyond. Hi, welcome to episode 71. My voice is a little deep. I have a little bit of a cold. I'm hoping it's not too distracting. So, today we're going to talk about food planning, when it's time to stop food planning, and what to do instead. Food planning in the years that I've been coaching has been an excellent tool, and it's also been like very misused by many of my clients, including myself when I was first getting started. So I want to tell you how to know when you're misusing the tool and why it's so important not to do that because it's going to get in the way of you getting results. I see it all the time. So I'll explore the downsides of over relying on food planning and how to transition to a more sustainable approach that helps you feel more like you're in charge. If you've ever felt trapped by making your daily meal plans or like you just want to stop, that it feels like a yoke around your neck, a big have to every day. And maybe you feel disappointed when you go to review how you complied with your meal plan from this morning later in the day, and you often feel disappointed or like even to the point where you might want to stop planning the next day because you're so tired of not following your food plan, it really is time for you to make a change. And there is a better way. So, planning is a tool that I use, many people use in weight loss. And why it's such an effective tool is because it makes you aware of your habits around food. So many of my clients, when they come to me wanting to lose weight and they haven't been planning, it's kind of like when I ask them, "How's your sleep?" Well, if they're not really paying attention to when they're going to bed and they're not really sure what time they woke up and they don't use a wearable device that tracks their sleep, I don't really believe them when they tell me how well they sleep because a good estimate of how you eat or how you sleep has to be based on data. And planning food ahead of time seems easy enough. Write down what you're going to eat today based on what you have in the fridge or what your calendar says you'll be doing today or where you're going to go out to eat, right? You just put all those pieces together, make your best guesses about what you're going to eat and write it down. Food planning in that way can easily become a misuse of the tool because we bring restrictive diet mentality into the food planning. What do I mean by that? We start to plan this idea of have to, need to, and should eat from our subconscious ideas that have been programmed over decades about the ideas we've gotten from society, media, the books we've read, the diets we've been on about what we have to eat in order to lose weight. Now, not all of you do this. Some of you do this. And for the some of you who do this, if you suspect yourself, this podcast is for you. If you don't really have a problem with what you write down to eat and you pretty much you know, get pretty close to what you wrote down that you wanted to eat that day. And when you're doing something different than what you planned, if that's not a big deal for you and you're still counting your number of overeats or noticing when you um, ate more than you planned to eat and you're just kind of noting it for that, that's using food planning in the way that it's designed to be used. And there really is inherently nothing wrong with the tool of food planning. It's how we approach it with restrictive diet mentality or an agenda to try to find ways to overeat by using the food plan in perverted ways, that can start to get in the way of the results that we're trying to get. And here's what I mean by that. Many of my clients, when they're not getting results, I'll say, send me your food plans. Not because I'm picking apart exactly what they're eating, right? I'm not a dietitian. I don't do that. But I will ask them, like, for example, if they say they had, I don't know, their oatmeal in the morning, and then at 10:30, they're having a yogurt, like an hour and a half after they had their breakfast. I'm going to question them with that. Well, why did you have the oatmeal? And if they say, well, I put it on my plan, that's not a good answer because we're not eating because we wrote something down on a piece of paper. I want you eating because your body signals have showed you that you're physically hungry for food, that your body is looking for fuel. So that's a misuse. That's a perversion of the plan. I do see this a lot. It's like that is just like planning based overeating is what it is. Now, you can write things down on your plan. You can absolutely plan for 2 snacks and 3 full meals plus a dessert. That doesn't mean you're going to eat all of it. That's just the plan and you're going to meet that moment. Your number one priority is to not comply with what the plan says, but to comply with what your body says. We're using your body signals, your hunger and satiety signals to tell you when to eat and how much to eat. The reason why we use the plan is to make you aware of how does in the course of my day, my expectations for what I'll eat differ from what I actually ate? And which foods am I overeating? When am I making choices that differ from what I planned? Because maybe I'm just a shitty planner for myself. I don't really know how to take my needs into consideration. I see this all the time. Sometimes we have to get planning wrong and notice, oh, I never put down, like I never eat on Wednesday what I put down I was going to eat on Wednesday. Why is that? Well, because it's back to back, maybe it's back to back meetings for you during work. And, you've gone through maybe a lot of like calories because you're crunching numbers all day. You had a ton of focus, or maybe that morning you worked out a really heavy workout and you really need more calories. You need more carbohydrates, say something like that. And this is also a very good use of planning where you notice when your expectation doesn't meet the actual thing that happened, right? Your actual food that you put in your mouth. It can make you a much better planner when you notice when you got it wrong. I often say to my clients, when you food plan, this is like you learning to become the best personal assistant that you could ever ask for. Think about hiring a personal assistant who is in charge of your food, say. Wouldn't that be nice to have one of those? Well, when you first hire your food assistant, right? They're not going to know what you like. But over the course of getting it wrong many times, eventually your assistant will know, like, let's plan for some nice carbohydrates for Heather on Wednesday after she's had back-to-back meetings and a heavy workout that morning. Right? She's going to want more carbohydrates on Wednesday than she has on Tuesday or Thursday. So these are all good reasons to use the plan. And then there's terrible reasons to plan. And only you know how you might be misusing food planning against yourself to implement some of those old untested ideas about like I'll ask like, well, okay, you ate a chocolate croissant, but it wasn't on your plan. How come it wasn't on your plan? And my clients might say, well, I can't plan for chocolate croissants. I mean, that right there is a limiting belief. So, what that tells me is she ate it. So, I know she wants the chocolate croissant, but she's also not giving herself permission to have it. So she is in over desire for forbidden foods. See, this is diet mentality working its way in. And yes, like the gold standard is to have you all eventually come to a place where, you have some of those flour and sugar or processed foods just once in a while, right? And that you mostly eat whole foods most of the time. But we have to get you from your current relationship to food over there. And we have to do it in a way where you take the wheel of your food decisions and you really like, if you want the chocolate croissant, you have to be planning for it at least some of the time. I did this, I learned, and this is how you're going to learn is when you have foods that you didn't plan for and you're probably going to be overeating them. Those foods are the ones that you need to start planning for. So that's the first step to transforming food planning from something that isn't helpful to something that is helpful. So when you plan for their chocolate croissant, and this is in my book, if you haven't gotten my book, you really need to get it because I go into this much more in depth. When you're first planning for foods that you haven't previously given yourself permission to eat, you are probably still going to have some over desire for them. But food planning is really powerful to start to give permission based eating to some of these formerly forbidden foods. And for many of you, that's where you have to start. Okay. It's just how you have to start. You can't start from a place coming in food famine or total food restriction for decades and decades, where you've never given yourself permission to eat the things that you truly love and expect yourself to just never have them. And when you do have them, you're like in a non-compliance way with yourself. So you're judging yourself as acting outside the lines of what you give yourself permission to do. It's like just shame eating. So the first step for many of my clients is to plan for some of these foods. And we're going to plan for them consistently, even if you're at first overeating them. Now, if you're massively binging, that's different. This is not what I'm talking about, but I'm just talking like, you eat to 90 or 100% full, right? When I first started having chocolate croissants, I had two because like the inner voice was like, well, Lord knows when she's going to give me permission to have these again. We never get these. May as well have two. But if you stick with it and you do it consistently, I did this on weekends for a couple of months. Eventually, my subconscious awareness got the idea these aren't forbidden anymore. If we want to plan for chocolate croissants every weekend, we can. So you go from food famine to food abundance thinking. And when you're in food abundance, then the rightness or wrongness of your food choices, the pressure of that starts to come down. And that's when we know that you can be food planning in a way that is helpful rather than a prescription. The worst thing you can do is like plan from diet mentality of like all these virtuous foods, you know, like, you know, protein shake for breakfast and then, chicken breast and romaine lettuce for lunch. And then, I don't know, some kind of virtuous food for dinner. What would that be? You name it. Pork loin and broccoli for dinner, right? There's not even any complex carbohydrates there. And yeah, you can probably do that for a while, but how sustainable is it? If it was sustainable, I would assume you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, right? Because you would have lost all your weight because you eat virtuously all the time. I mean, some people can do that, and that's great. But if you're craving other things and you're overeating other things that you're not giving yourself permission to eat on your plans, you're misusing food planning. So the first step is to start planning for some of those foods that you eat off plan for. Okay. Now, I'm going to blow your mind. And I say this all the time, and people still get surprised. If you eat something other than what you planned, that is never responsible for your weight gain. right? Squiggles on a piece of paper or virtual screen, right? Doesn't make you overweight and it doesn't make you gain weight. What makes your weight change, positively or negatively, is by not listening to your hunger and satiety cues, eating when you're not hungry, and not stopping at what the percentage full is that you need to eat to based on your goals. 70% full to lose weight, 80% full to maintain. And if you want to gain weight or gain muscle, maybe slightly more than 80%, but not much more. Okay. So there are nuances. There's a lot of nuances to planning. So food planning is helpful when you're starting out to lose weight so that you can build awareness of, oh, this is what I said I was going to eat. And look at what I ate. It was different. And then we can dig into that and try to understand why you made those choices. You know, there are good reasons why you made those choices. And when you get curious about that rather than judgmental, that's when you'll start to change the underlying structure of how you engage with food and permission based eating to help you get closer and closer where intention meets what you actually ate. Now, here's some signs, and I'll list them. When your food planning is a problem, and there's signs that it's time to stop. And then I'll tell you what to do instead. If you feel trapped or anxious when your plans don't go perfectly, if you avoid planning because you're judging your lack of compliance from the previous day, if you eat because it's on your plan without hunger present. Oh, I had a snack because I wrote it on the plan. Nope. If you avoid food planning because you don't want to pin yourself down, because it's too hard to know what will be available or even what you want, so you don't do any of it. That's all or nothing thinking. If you rely on planning virtuous options to feel in control for your food, rather than trusting that you can figure out what and how much to eat and still reach your goals. This is limiting beliefs that are driving your food planning and keeping you captive in a circle of restrictive thinking around food. As an offshoot, when you virtuous plan, broccoli and dry ass chicken breast, because you think you need to eat that to lose weight. And then you think, oh, I got a meal prep and I have to do this for all my meals in order to lose weight. Like you're in la la land about how to lose weight. I have 15,000 hours or more now of one-on-one coaching. And I can tell you, you don't have to eat virtuous foods to lose weight. Now, if the closer you get to goal weight, the more we have to dial in whole foods eating, right? And foods that allow you to lose weight easier. But for most of my clients, there's plenty of room to have some of those processed foods or some of those foods with flour and sugar some of the time in order to meet your food habits where they are and still lose weight. Okay. Just because you think that is hard to do doesn't mean that that's true. You have to get in there and start planning for some of those non-virtuous options. Then you challenge yourself once it's on your food plan to have it when you are physically hungry and stop when you've had the correct percentage to enough. For fat loss, it's 70%. And you need to repeat this many times. And if you're still not losing weight, you DM me because I've not seen it yet. Okay. Don't let yourself restrictive food plan because of some idea that doing it another way probably won't work. You actually have to get in there and prove to yourself that it can't. And like I said, I haven't had one client who's been able to prove to me that they can't lose weight unless they only eat virtuous foods. Okay. All right. So when we think in the virtuous way, like that, all or nothing thinking, you're going to also avoid meal prep. And it's going to become a source of both guilt and overwhelm. Guilt if you don't do it, and then overwhelm that you have to. That's a problem too. Okay. So here's the bigger picture. If you've recognized that the way that you food plan is a problem, I want you to see the bigger picture. Food planning is a tool, it's not a weapon to use against yourself. When it becomes too restrictive, it prevents you from connecting with your internal tastes and preferences for food that your inner self wants. We know what your diet brain thinks, but there's another part of you who has her own real tastes and preferences for all kinds of different food. And if you never give her a say that she gets to plan for and eat those foods with permission, then that rightness or wrongness, that kind of tug of war where you're trying to like push down that desire for those chocolate croissants or whatever it is for you and push that away. What it does is it takes a tool like food planning and it becomes a compliance tool. I'm either virtuously losing weight or I'm failing. And when you lift that out and you truly give yourself permission to plan for the foods that you want to eat, all the different foods, then you start to get curious rather than judgmental. And you start to, when you're curious, then you start to ask really good questions of like, okay, so for example, if I've given myself permission to have the chocolate croissants on the weekends, right? Like I did. Well, how does that affect my hunger for lunch later in the day? My satiety 3 hours later. Maybe you check your blood sugar, see how it affects your glucose, your blood sugar readings. How does it affect your energy? How does it affect your physiology? I had fatty liver, I had prediabetes a few years ago. That's all resolved. But at the time that I was planning the chocolate croissants, I had all those things. And that was hard to do because, it had flour and sugar in it. And I knew that it was affecting my blood sugar. It was giving me a blood sugar spike. But I just knew that I couldn't keep restricting because the truth was I was still overeating these things and I was doing it without permission. So I thought, okay, let me work the other end of this and just start to at least decide ahead of time that I can have these things rather than judging myself as letting myself down when I had them. And the truth was, it didn't affect my blood sugar as much as I thought. When I had the 2 croissants, it did. But when I had just the one, I was still hungry for my regular lunch about the same time. I didn't feel lethargic. I felt energetic. And because I had chosen like sort of, a less virtuous option, say for breakfast with the croissant, I just found that I naturally wanted like more of my greens and protein for my lunch as like a nice complement to that other choice, which was so revelatory for me because before I gave myself permission to have it on purpose, it was just nothing but an endless food plan of virtuous foods. And I didn't want any of it. But when I gave myself permission to plan for the croissants and then also plan for that like nice complement of like salad and protein and good fats afterward, I loved both of those even more because they were, yes, they were permission based, but they complemented each other so nicely. So there's a whole world waiting for you beyond judgment of what you eat. Okay. Permission based eating can do all this for you. So, what I want you to consider doing instead, if you're having some of these challenges in your food planning and some of this restrictive diet thinking is leaking over into your food planning, I want you to consider food logging rather than food planning. So here's how it works. Food logging can be many things. It's not any one thing, but instead, generally, it's this. It's like, hey, I'm going to log the food that I actually ate. That's the simplest way. So after you choose to eat, hopefully when you're hungry and stop at your percentage of enough, you'll just go back in afterward and just log your food. This is the best option for those of you who feel absolutely wrung out by planning and you want to take your planner and throw it out the window. Okay. Just start with food logging, do it for a week, see how much better it is. Okay. So it will take you from this dichotomy of here's my plan and let's see how well I'm able to follow it. It's almost like entrapment for many of you. I don't want you to do that anymore. If your food plan feels like entrapment, where it's like forced compliance to eat in ways that you don't really want to eat, okay, you should not be food planning. For the love of Mike, stop. Just switch to food logging. Okay. Food logging will still allow you to compile your data, which is so important to help you with your habits around food and getting the results that you're looking for. Because you'll still be able to circle any foods that you had that were an overeat. You can still put the percentage that you ate to full, right? So you know if it's 70, 80 or more percent. And you'll still be able to track your cumulative overeats in the course of your weigh in week. These things are super important for you to stay intact, even if you're not planning ahead of time, right? And what this does, food logging, switching to food logging builds trust in yourself that you can make choices about what to eat without rigid diet planning ahead of time. And it allows you also to be as specific or general as needed on a day-to-day basis. This could change. So here's what it looks like. I want you to picture this on your daily planner page, right? Use two columns: expected food and actual food. Okay. So if you're still keeping planning intact, maybe you only have a couple of issues with planning, you just use that actual column as the place where you plan ahead of time. Okay. For those of you who are only food logging, well, you'll only use the actual column, right? But let's say you're like, okay, food planning, I hate it. I'm just going to food log now. But let's say, I don't know, let's say that you're on a business trip and you're in a conference and they've given you a whole menu of things that you're going to be eating from 9 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. Well, I mean, you know what you're going to be eating and you can choose from them. So, yeah, make a plan when it's super easy to do that. Or you could just make it really general and you could just say, I'm going to have, like a shake in the morning. And then you could say like salad with protein for lunch. Or you could just say follow hunger and enough cues for dinner. You could do any one of those things. What I'm saying is, what I'm really getting at is don't have all or nothing thinking with this. Dip in and dip out using these two columns as you can. If you have a day that it's super easy to plan ahead of time and it doesn't feel restrictive to do so, then do it. Use the planned column, right? Or the expected food column. And if it still is pretty problematic for you, only do the actual eating and fill in after the fact. Okay. So there's expected food in the left-hand column and actual food in the right. So for example, like to get into the nitty-gritty of this, let's say I use the expected food column and I plan for a dessert. Like usually I just say dessert. If I didn't eat the dessert in the expected column, I just put a strike through it. And that's my sign to myself, like I didn't have it. I just didn't eat it. So anything that you don't eat in your expected column, you just cross out. And anything that you did eat that wasn't in your expected column, you just add in the actual column. And then I just put checks around all the things that I actually ate. I circle anything that I ate beyond my percentage full, my desired percentage full. So that way, when I'm flipping through my plans before I weigh in, the 7 days prior to my weigh in, I count the circles. I can easily count the circles and count the number of overeats. I mean, hopefully, you're doing this each day so that when you start your day, you're already aware of how many cumulative overeats you've had. Okay. So, number one, start food logging instead of food planning if you're having some of those issues I talked about. Then review your week and see what results you get. If you're feeling more curious, open, and like you have permission to eat the foods that you really want to eat, great. This is working for you. Number two, try planning your overeats ahead of time. Even if you get rid of the food planning and you're just logging, if you know Friday night you're going to have your pizza and you like to have that extra slice and that's counts as an overeat for you, put it in there. Just on Friday for expected. Just write overeat to 90% with pizza. This is fantastic to do because it lets your inner self know I'm planning to have an overeat of one of my favorite foods. So I don't really need to think about overeating other things that aren't like that a big of a deal for me. I'm going to save my overeat for that pizza. It's coming. And a lot of times this just takes down the noise, or the desire to overeat gets way decreased when you actually give yourself permission to have it and you plan for it. Okay. Try that. See how that works. You can plan for types of food rather than specific foods, like I mentioned before, like salad with protein, or you could say, fish with a sweet potato or something like that. You don't have to be super specific, and never put in amounts of food because then you're just counting calories, right? You're telling yourself ahead of time, like you're parceling out food to yourself. I don't want you doing that. I want you listening to your hunger and satiety cues to tell you when and how much to eat. The food planning or the food logging, whatever you decide to do, that's the what to eat. That gives you a general guideline. And if you deviate from that general guideline, it doesn't fucking matter. What matters is if you ate it when you were hungry and you stopped at your desired percentage of enough. Okay. Sorry for the cursing. It's never being off plan with your food that makes you gain weight. Okay. That's just squiggles on a screen. It means nothing. Squiggles on a page. Okay. Plan for types of food rather than specific foods. Here's another one. Always count cumulative overeats as you go throughout your weigh-in week. So you're aware, like if you can have 4 overeats per week and you can still lose weight because you've been doing this with me for weeks, right? And if you don't keep track of how many you've had and it's the day before your weigh-in and you're not sure how many you've had in your week and you just decide to overeat, well, what if you've already had 4 that morning that you wake up and now you've had the 5th one and you've blown your weigh-in week? You're probably not going to lose weight. That's just a shame. That's like a football team, like deciding to punt or go for first down, like not even knowing how many yards you have left. It makes no sense. So be strategic. In order to be strategic, you got to know how many overeats you've already had before you even decide to eat for the day, what you're going to eat, and if you're going to overeat. You got to know. You got to be strategic. Otherwise, you're literally spitting into the wind. Okay. All right. Number 4. Sorry. Next one. Reflect. So before you weigh in each week, review your food logs or your plans, whatever you're deciding to do for the past 7 full days. Count up the numbers of overeats and just check that the percentage full you're eating to when you're not overeating is falling in line with what you want to do. 70% or 80%, right? and then make a prediction of what the scale is going to say. Try to also, when you're flipping through those previous 7 days of plans or food logs, look for any overlooked overeats. Like, did I really have that when I was hungry? Or was I fudging it? Did I forget to log any food? That's pretty common. That happens a lot. All right. So we know that food planning can get perverted when it becomes a way to manage anxiety by creating a sense of false control, right? If I only give myself permission to eat this today, then I'll be doing weight loss right. And it's just false. It's just the way that your brain is designed. It's going to link how you plan to safety and guaranteed results. But you see, you're outsourcing this to a piece of paper. What I want you to do is I want you to internally source based on your lived experience of waiting for hunger and stopping at a percentage full that helps you get results. Okay. When plans fail, it oftentimes triggers feelings of failure or like inadequacy, which perpetuates a cycle of guilt and all or nothing thinking with many of my clients. And again, it was never following the plan that created lack of results. It was always how much you're eating and how often you're eating. If you're eating when you're not hungry, you're overfueling yourself. And if you're eating beyond 75% full and you're trying to lose weight, you're overeating. Okay. So let's focus on the right parts and stop the planning shaming. Okay. What I want you to do is work a little bit on your automatic negative thinking when your food plans or you're noticing in your food logs that you didn't eat as you kind of expected. Just notice some of those specific thoughts that don't feel good. And I want you to question them. Is this actually true? Or why would it make sense that I ate this way? What was I really after? If I was eating when I wasn't hungry, what was I thinking the eating was going to give me? So asking yourself really good questions will get to the structure of why you're doing what you do. Like the choices we make around food, they always serve a purpose. They're not just inherently bad or virtuous. We human beings always act in their own self-interest. It's just the way that we think about it. Our self-interest is sometimes not really the full story about what we're doing. Right? If you're eating and you're not hungry to relax, say, well, we need to figure out other ways for you to feel the feeling of relaxation. And then you need to set yourself up to have a shot at feeling that. Like lately, I have an infrared sauna now. And I've got this nice habit loop going with like being in the infrared sauna and thinking, this is so good for me. This is so relaxing. When I first got the sauna, I kind of worried that I would just be too hot and oppressive in there, but it really isn't. And I really worked to kind of like be open to it feeling really good for me. And you can do this with any kinds of overeating that you're doing too. Like if you're tempted to overeat, if that thought crosses your mind when you sit down to eat, like, oh, I just want to eat everything. I just want to eat till I'm stuffed. Like question that. Just be like, no, I actually don't like when I overeat. I want to stop at the right amount of satiety. In order to do that, I've got to really slow down. I've got to really taste my food. And I've got to really focus on the taste and the texture, the temperature of the food, and allowing myself to relax as I eat. So here's some practical steps to break the cycle of restrictive diet planning. You're going to gradually reduce the reliance on your detailed plans ahead of time by experimenting with one unplanned meal or one unplanned day per week where you just food log instead of food plan ahead of time. that's one way you can get started. Another thing you can do is focus on building mindfulness and awareness to respond to real-time hunger and satisfaction cues as you eat, as the main mechanism for you to get the results that you're looking for, rather than this idea of compliance or non-compliance with what the plan says. Okay. I want you to also think about celebrating small successes when you are food logging rather than food planning. I want you to see that. I want you to think about it on purpose as just as successful a way to help you change your habits around food to get the results you want as food planning was ahead of time. Okay. You can get results either way. So, planning or just food logging, it's an awareness tool to help you make you aware of your habits around food so you can slowly change them over time so you can change your weight. It's not designed and never was to be a compliance tool that you use against yourself to force yourself into virtuous choices around food or as a way to overeat by permission just because you wrote it in the plan. Okay. For homework, I want you to, number one, reflect on your current relationship with food planning. Does it feel like an empowering tool or does it feel restrictive? And if it feels restrictive, I want you to try some of those other options that I gave you. If it feels empowering, keep doing what you're doing. Number two, I want you to try planning for some of those non-virtuous foods this week if you never give yourself permission to plan for them. Think long and hard about what day, what meal makes the most sense for you to plan this food. And then part two of the challenge is not just planning for it ahead of time, but to meet the moment when you sit down to eat that food that you planned, whether it's an overeat or not, and follow what you set out to do. Like, for example, with the pizza, that was an overeat. You're going to have that extra slice that takes you to a slight overeat. And I want you to enjoy it with permission. Pizza is so yummy. It's one of my favorites. Like, what kind of life is it if you can never enjoy a slight overeat of pizza without feeling guilty and like you did something wrong? Like, life is just too short for that. It's just one meal that you plan of just a few a week. So do it on purpose, do it with permission, and enjoy it if it's going to be an overeat. And then number three would be to keep a journal of how you feel physically and emotionally after meals. This will really help you hone in on your choices around food. Yeah, I don't teach like good food, bad foods, right? But your body will let you know. It always lets you know what foods it does well with and which ones it has trouble with. You've got to pay attention to how you feel eating certain foods. If you feel bloated, if you feel headachy, if you feel gassy, right? If eating too much cheese stops you up or whatever it is, like just notice that and just notice that your body doesn't have an agenda against you. It's always trying to tell you and give you clues as to what foods really help you thrive. And that's the whole point. So if you can plan the foods you really want to have, and then you take note of how they make you feel, you will naturally start to gravitate toward foods that you do really well with because they're specific and unique to you and your body. Okay. Share your thoughts or experiences with me about food planning and how to know if it's still right for you or if you're misusing the tool or if maybe you want to just consider food logging instead. Find me on Instagram at Thrive in Midlife. We can keep the discussion going over there. Thanks for joining me today. I'll talk to you soon. Stay focused and so long. Hey, if this episode resonated for you, then let's connect. Visit hbeardsley.com/subscribe. That's HBEARDSLEY.com/subscribe and get on the list. you'll get a free gift, periodic coaching, plus advance notice of in-person events and workshops.